Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Origins of Today podcast. And we are doing the second episode in our series, Which Side Was Right? So today's episode is going to be about World War II. I really hope you guys enjoy this episode. It's going to be a little bit more controversial, but that's what we're going for. So, guys, we're going to get straight into the episode right after this intro. World War II began in 1939 when Nazi Germany invaded Poland, but it quickly spiraled into a global conflict. On one side, you had Germany, Italy, and Japan, and they sought empire and domination. On the other hand, you had the Allies, which were Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and later on, the United States, and they fought against the Nazis to prevent them from accomplishing their goal. Now, it was a war of ideologies, atrocities, and resistance. It ended up costing over 70 million lives. By 1945, the Axis lay in ruins. But the world was changed forever. Now, decades later, we ask the question no one has dared to ask during the war itself: which side was right and why? So, guys, we're going to get into every single nation in this war. We're going to analyze their goals. We're going to analyze not how they accomplished those goals. Remember, we're only analyzing how they entered their role, and there's going to be a little bit of complication with a couple of the nations, but I'm really excited for this episode. Germany, the thing you really do have to remember when we're talking about these Axis powers is that a lot of what they did, a lot of their foreign policy, a lot of the way they behaved in the war, or really most of it, was dictated by their dictator-like leaders who led them during the war. So when we're talking about these nations, it's not necessarily reflective of the nations, it's reflective of the leaders who are leading the nations. Contrary to maybe World War I. Germany, they were led by their ambitious leader, Adolf Hitler, and he obviously had many territorial aspirations in all of Europe and really had some very bad things he wanted to do to the population of Europe. So the way he starts the war, obviously he was annexing lots of territories around Europe before the war officially started, but in the end he finally invaded Poland, and that's really what started to kick the war off. So he invaded Poland and he divided it with the Soviets. So I am now going to talk about whether or not Germany was justified in this war. No, Germany was not justified in this war, with a slight caveat. So this is going to be the controversial part. So no, territorial acquisition is never a good reason to go to war, especially if we're talking about sovereign nations. Now, with that said, the punishments inflicted on Germany in World War I were part of the reason Adolf Hitler could convince the German people to go along with his plan. Now, I'm not saying that that justifies it. I'm merely saying the Allies had a part in this war too. The Allies from World War I, at the very least. They had a part in causing this war to happen. So it's just something to think about. Germany was 100% not justified in their war. Like, obviously, I don't know why anyone would ever defend Germany and say that they were justified in World War II. They weren't. But you really do have to remember that event. So I think it's very important to remember, especially when we are talking about the causes of the war and why a nation goes to war and how a nation could even go to war and follow a leader so brutal. The USSR originally was on the side of Germany, at the very least. So they split Poland between themselves, and I believe they were offered a position in the German, Italian, Japanese pact that they made, but they came in with a bunch of demands. Adolf Hitler didn't like that very much because he's like, you're kind of the odd man out here in this alliance, so we're not going to let you in. And basically, he then invaded Russia. But so it certainly seems like Russia was building bases in the western regions of Russia. It appears they're preparing for like a preemptive strike on Nazi Germany, which I think is fascinating because that means Russia was planning for an attack on Germany. And then when Germany invaded Russia, they basically took all of the bases that the USSR had built on their border. They took all the bases that they were preparing for war with Germany. And I really do wonder what would have happened if Adolf Hitler had waited a little bit, because everyone always talks about how much of a blunder it was to invade the USSR in 1941, which Adolf Hitler did and ended up, in my opinion, probably costing him the war. But if he hadn't, then maybe that means Russia would have attacked him. The same thing would have happened. So I think that's a little bit getting off topic, but in the end, I'm going to say Russia is not justified in this war. They were very territorial motivated. They just wanted more land, as can be seen by their original actions, helping Germany split Poland and all that sort of stuff. So I would say they are not justified in this war. Something's fascinating about France is that they were building up military forces throughout the 1930s. It's obvious they were preparing for war with Nazi Germany. They declared war on Germany along with the UK when Germany invaded Poland. So I would say France is justified. They're protecting their territory. I think they were anticipating an attack by Nazi Germany. Now, I do think it's interesting because you could see that as then building up military to invade Germany too. So I don't really know. Personally, I would say this is more of a defensive action, but those forces very well could have turned on Germany and been used to getting land France wanted. So I'm going to say they're justified because that certainly seems like a defensive action to me. Now, another nation we're going to look at is the UK. So 2 days after the Nazi invasion of Poland, the UK declared war on Germany, and also France did too, obviously. So personally, I think the UK was pretty justified in this. They basically said, Germany, if you declare war on Poland, we will declare war on you. They were seeing a rising threat in Europe, and they were responding to it. Now, this is different than the UK's response in World War I, because if they were just declaring war on Germany to uphold laws and rules and all that sort of stuff, I would say no. It's not really your job to do that. But I would definitely say the UK is justified in this war. They definitely felt a threat to their nation, and it was a credible threat, quite a bit of a credible threat. Germany had amassed amazing power at this point. Yeah, I would definitely say they are justified in fighting this war and entering the war on the side of the Allies. Japan was hit by the Depression pretty hard, just like many other nations, and it left many poor farmers. And nationalist groups were able to harness this energy, and they were looking to grab land and resources. So they launched an unprovoked attack on the US, obviously. They'd also been going to war with Asia for years and years and years, and China, and it was just, they had been very territorially ambitious, and the US basically was like, no, we're going to put an embargo on you until you stop. And Japan, they were like, well, we literally cannot survive without US goods. So they decided to attack the US. They tried to catch our carriers sleeping at Pearl Harbor, but our carriers weren't there. But they did end up doing quite a bit of damage to Pearl Harbor. They obviously joined the Axis powers, and I don't know. So basically, same thing with Germany, though. I would say look at the events that kind of allowed these nationalist parties to gain power in their nation, and that is part of the Great Depression. All these poor farmers, I guess, have just been radicalized by these nationalist leaders, and the U.S. put an embargo on them. I mean, the U.S. was kind of playing with fire there, but also, you can't really accept Japanese dominion in the Asian areas. So I can kind of see where they were coming from there. So yeah, I would say Japan is not justified, with obviously a slight angle to that, where it's like, yeah, there are definitely some things that caused this. Now, that doesn't justify the atrocities they committed, but we're obviously not talking about like what happened during the war, merely how they got involved in the war, their goals, ambitions, all that sort of stuff. So obviously, Japan was looking for land and resources, so never a good reason to go to war, except in some very small cases, which I would agree with, and we could do an episode on that one of these days. But yeah, so I would say they are not justified in this war. All right, and then we are going to get into Italy. So they joined the war as a result of their alliance with Nazi Germany, and they had territorial aspirations in the Balkans and Africa, and they thought the Germans would help them achieve it. So Mussolini was obviously a very ambitious dictator, similar to Adolf Hitler. It makes sense that those two would be friends. Mussolini was kind of like the little Hitler, because he wasn't quite as effective as Adolf Hitler was in conquering or anything of the sort. But Italy was a real power in World War II, and I would say that they were not justified, obviously. And really, there's nothing to make them justified. There's no angle you can put on it. There's no spin you can put on it. Italy was not justified in their war at all. So yeah, that is a hard no. Italy was not justified in fighting World War II. Adolf Hitler, he did not want the United States to enter the war. He told his submarines, do not attack American ships. He was like, no, no, no. He obviously knew his history because he remembered what happened in World War I. And just like we went over in the last episode, it was pretty effective, the United States military. So I would say the United States has mixed. I think it's mixed, really. I don't think they are necessarily justified. I don't think they're not justified. I think there's a little bit too much nuance to this. So the U.S. was officially supplying arms to the Allies before they were in the war, and it was like lend-lease, cash and carry. Like it was. They were definitely keeping the Allies alive during World War II. Then they also embargoed Japan, so I think they were kind of asking for it in a way. Obviously, FDR really wanted to get into war, and a lot of people didn't. So, if you ask me, I think I can't say that they were justified in their war because they were looking for a fight, kind of. But I also think that their help in World War II is instrumental in defeating the Axis powers, and they were helping their allies, obviously. So I do think, there's a little bit for them there too. So that's going to be a mixed response for me. I think they were mostly justified, but there's also some stuff there that I can't quite say that they were wholly justified. So yeah, that is the United States. Now, to give a final verdict on the Axis powers and the Allies, I know a lot of people are going to want me to say something absolutely crazy in this, and just say something super controversial. I think it's pretty cut and dry. The Axis powers were after domination. They were after territorial acquisition. There might be some factors that drove that, but it does not justify it by any means. And then the Allies were trying to stop that. They were trying to defend their interests in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. They were genuinely trying to defend their interests. There might be some underlying reasons that they wanted to, but in the end, I'm going to say Axis were not justified in entering the war, whereas the Allies were. And that'll be my final verdict. You guys can argue with me in the comments about how actually Nazi Germany was 100% justified in fighting World War II, and so, I don't know, something like that. And then I can tell you why they're not. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Next episode is going to be the Civil War, and that'll be the last episode in the series, and I am extremely excited about that one because the Civil War is another one of my favorite wars to study. So yeah, anyways guys, hope you have a great day and God bless.